I'm David Yepsen. I'm the director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute, and welcome to tonight's State of the American Worker lecture with Jorge Ramirez, president of the Chicago Federation of Labor and a vice president of the AFL-CIO. Mr. Ramirez is here as part of the Hispanic Latino Heritage Month program as well. On behalf of the Chancellor at SIU, and I think Chancellor Caldwell is here. I see. I thought I might see. But on his behalf, I want to welcome Mr. Ramirez to the SIU campus. I also see a number of other labor leaders from Southern Illinois, and I want to welcome you here as well. And I want to welcome the Latino students, faculty, and staff who are here tonight and who helped us generate a crowd. Come on down. There's room in here. I also want to thank my colleagues at the Simon Institute, Delio Calzolari, Carol Greenlee, Shiloh Dietz, and Carrie Day for the work they did pulling this event together. The Institute is sponsoring a series of speakers dealing with the issues of income inequality and the decline of the American middle class. We seek to focus attention on this problem and provide a variety of perspectives for dealing with it. Our format tonight is our normal one. After his address, Mr. Ramirez will take a few questions from the audience. Now, to introduce our guest speaker, I'd like to introduce a very special guest and give a special thanks to Southern Illinois' own Ed Smith of Ulico. Ed is a great labor leader in his own right, and we appreciate his support for the Institute and his help in bringing Mr. Ramirez to campus. Earlier, he helped us last year bring Sarita Gupta as our guest. It was a great speech. And one thing I've learned about Ed in my time in Southern Illinois, he's not forgotten where he came from. Ed.
Thank you, David. Thank you. A great honor and privilege for me to be here tonight. I see Sheila Simon out there, and I for all the students in the room particularly, and those of you, we had a special guy in Paul Simon, and it's just this institute is him. I mean, having this lecture series and everything that Paul envisioned, his work carries on, and it's a great. Sheila, you know your mom and dad both. Would be so proud of what the work that's going on here. So anyway, it's a great honor and privilege for me to be here. And I want to tell you about one of the most exciting, dynamic labor leaders we have that are fighting for working people every day in this country, and that's Jorge Ramirez. And I asked him to come down and address. I said there will be a lot of students in the house, and I said, have you ever been to Carbondale? No, never been to Carbondale. Have you ever been to Southern Illinois? No, never been to Southern Illinois. I said, well, it's about time. Okay? He said, how do I get there? I said, you get on Interstate 57, and I said, you just go south. And then you keep going. He said, past Kankakee. Yeah, that's right. Farther south than that? Yeah. How about Champaign? Yeah, farther south. Just keep on. I said, then when you get to Route 13, turn right. And I said, you'll run right into it. So anyway, let me just tell you a little bit about your speaker tonight. Jorge Ramirez is president of the Chicago Federation of Labor and vice president of the AFL-CIO. The Chicago Federation of Labor is the third largest central labor council in the United States. The AFL-CIO is representing over 500,000 working people across Chicago and Cook County. The AFL-CIO is the umbrella federation of U.S. unions, representing 13 million working men and women. Jorge has served as an officer of the Chicago Federation of Labor since July 2006 and was elected the CFL's first Latino president in July of 2010. In February of 2015, he was elected to the AFL-CIO Executive Council as a vice president, helping to guide the daily work of the National Federation. Jorge earned his first union card in 1988 through the United Food and Commercial Workers International Union, Local 1546. He worked his way up through the ranks, ultimately serving as UFCW Local 1546 Executive Director before coming to the Chicago Federation of Labor. A son of Mexican immigrants, Jorge understands the struggles his father, a meatpacking worker in Chicago's back-of-the-yards neighborhood, and his fellow workers endured to unionize their workplace in the 1960s. Many of the packing house workers were immigrants, often unable to fight for their rights on their own. But by standing together, they secured a union contract that offered better wages and benefits. As a child, Jorge witnessed firsthand the strength a collective voice gave to the packing house workers, occasionally standing with his father on the picket lines. The lessons he learned provided the motivation he has to serve working men and women in organized labor today. In his role as president of the Chicago Federation of Labor, Jorge serves on the executive and advisory boards for labor, civic, and community organizations across the city and around the country. His involvement with these organizations allow him to represent the interest of labor and protect the fundamental rights of all workers. As a board member of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, Jorge is promoting the Reserve's dual mandate of maximum employment and stable prices to foster a healthy economy. Through his work with the World Business Chicago, Choose Chicago, and Chicago's Infrastructure Trust and Navy Pier Inc., Jorge is working to bring jobs and expand the region's economy by growing and improving the city's manufacturing, infrastructure, tourism, and trade show opportunities. Locally, Jorge serves on the board of Mercy Home for Boys and Girls, the United Way of Metropolitan Chicago, the Archdiocese of Chicago Office for Immigrant Affairs, St. Joseph's College Seminary, and other civic and community groups. Jorge graduated from the University of Texas at El Paso, where he was a linebacker on their football team, with a double major in marketing and computer information systems. He later went on to receive his Juris Doctorate from Chicago-Kent College of Law. He and his wife, Katrina, have 4 sons. Please welcome Jorge Ramirez.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ed. That bio drives me crazy. It's way too long to go through, but I do appreciate it. Director Dave Yepsen, I'd like to thank you as well. And of course, the Chancellor as well, Chancellor Caldwell, who I met earlier. It's a pleasure to be here. It's amazing. The room is packed. It's nice to see. I have a feeling that some of you are getting extra credit, or some of you may have been promised a trick or treat or something like that. This isn't that speech. But I do want to thank you, Ed, especially for the invite to come down here. And it's an honor, really, to be here. And for everything that you do, Ed, I can't thank you enough publicly for what you've done, not just as a labor leader, but for a business leader with a conscience. And I can't thank you enough for that. I'd also, hold on, let me get untangled here. I'd like to thank Sheila Simon for everything that she's done as Lieutenant Governor. She's not just former Lieutenant Governor of our great state, but a friend. So thank you for being here. Share with her husband. Thank you. So I'm going to throw some chum in the water and hopefully get things cooking a little bit here. I was asked to talk about, the middle class, the disparities in the middle class, the work that I do as a labor leader in labor's future. But I think I have to take a step back first and talk a little bit about where we're at as a country. And what I've done is chosen to pick a point in time where labor unions were at their strongest and greatest, and not necessarily focus on labor, but on our country, right? So you take a period of time in the 1950s, right? In the 1950s, there's certain metrics that I want to look at. One, where we stood as far as economic upward mobility and how we ranked in standard of living against all other industrialized nations. It's pretty simple. The United States was ranked #1, right? For standard of living against all other industrialized nations, #1 for economic upward mobility, the ability to move from lower class to middle class, middle to upper. Some other metrics. CEO to average hourly worker ratio. What was it back then? It was about 30 to 1. Right? For every dollar a CEO made, average hourly worker made or for every $30, that they made, there was $1 that was made by a worker, right? So that was the ratio back then. It's important to keep track of that. 1950s, corporate taxes were about 30% of the federal revenue. Poverty and hunger in our country were at an all-time low. Infrastructure, roads, bridges, rail, dams, things like that, public infrastructure, ranked number one against all other industrialized nations, right? And the last thing is the middle class. The middle class then was the smallest it's ever been in our nation's history. The gap between wealthy and poor, right, was the smallest that it's ever been in our nation's history. So let's unpack all that a little bit, take them on one by one. So in the 1950s, the United States ranked number one in economic upward mobility and standard of living. Where are we at today? Standard of living, we're 8 now, knocking on the door of number 9. Economic upward mobility, we're in the 7th place. In the 1950s, the CEO average to hourly worker ratio was 30 to 1. It's 331 to 1 now. If you back out organized labor and focus solely on the minimum wage workforce, it's closer to 740 to 1, right? So a Fortune 500 CEO will make more on his or her average day of work before lunch than their average hourly worker will in a year. That's the difference. So without politicizing this too much, here's another perspective. We have certain elected officials in this very state who think that in order to remain competitive, Illinois should lower its minimum wage to the federal minimum wage. Does anybody know what that is? It's $7.25 an hour, right? So assuming you can get 40 hours worth of work in a week, which we know 40 hours of work in a week is not the new standard. It's closer to 30, 35, even lower. And the reason why that's being driven down lower is because employers en masse are trying to escape their responsibilities under the Affordable Care Act and push down employment into part-time status, right? So the number's going down. It's going away from 40 hours a week and closer to 30. Right? But let's assume that you can get 40 hours of work, making $7.25 an hour, right? That would get you about $15,080 a year before taxes. On a weekly basis, $290 a week. That's supposed to be a fair wage, right? Now, those of us in the labor movement, we know that anything but a fair wage. We argue against that, we fight against that, we devoted our lives to fighting for something better. In the 1950s, corporate taxes accounted for about 30% of all federal income. Today, they make up about 10% of all federal revenue. If you break it down from the 1950s, I'll throw some quick numbers at you and then I'll boil it down and tell you what I got out of it. In the 1950s, individual income taxes represented about 43% of federal revenue. Today, it's about 50%. Payroll taxes then were 10%, now 36%. Corporate income taxes were 33%, now 10%. Excise, estate, and other taxes were about 15% then, now only represent about 4%. So over the years, the federal revenue coming from individual income plus payroll taxes is growing, while the share coming from corporate and other revenues has shrunk. Why is that important? Why do you think it's important? Corporations benefit from a strong dollar. They benefit from a strong nation. You know, folks would argue that we're the last superpower left on earth. From a corporate perspective, it's beneficial because you get all the protections and the status and the stature of being headquartered or having major operations in a country like the United States, right? And part of the reason why that is, I suspect, is because we're one of the only countries that hasn't devalued our currency, right? And also because we have the largest army in the world. So if you took the 26 most developed nations in the world, the United States spends more than the remaining 25 on its military, right? A lot of military might, right? The perception around the world is that we will back and protect our interests around the world, right? But what you have going on now is something really strange. You have, over the past decade, the number of corporate bankruptcies has increased tremendously, right? And they do it to escape their responsibilities to their employees and their responsibilities to their creditors. But that's not the only interesting thing that's happened. This whole notion of corporate inversion. Do folks know what that is? All right, it's when companies will be American companies, and they'll say, hey, I'm going to now merge with a Canadian company or an Asian company, and I'm going to reclassify myself as headquartered in that other country that has a more favorable tax outlook for me. So they'll escape paying their taxes here in America, right, and choose to pay lower taxes somewhere else in another country because they do business there. It's part of this whole globalization discussion that we'll be having. But there's another unintended consequence of all this. You know, like I said, we have the most powerful military. That military is raised through taxes. When we engage in these type of strategies, right, we're placing a greater burden on raising that army on the average worker, on the average taxpayer, right? I argue to corporations when they engage in inversion strategies and things like that, that it's economically unpatriotic. And I think until we start to look at things in that light, nothing will change. Something else to keep in mind. So in the 1950s, hunger and poverty were at an all-time low, right? Today, they're at their highest level since then, right? The poverty rate is 14.8%. 46.7 million people, that's 14.8% of the population, live in poverty. 15.5 million children under the age of 18, that's 21% of the population, live in poverty. And about 4.6 million seniors, 65 and older, live in poverty. 9 out of 14 states, significantly higher, and the highest levels of poverty come from states that are called right to work, right? We live in a right to bargain state in Illinois, right? Which is a hot debate right now. There's a lot of the different agendas that are being thrown around politically are what's the difference between right to work? Sounds good, but it's a bit of a misnomer. It's mislabeling, I would say, because that's not what it delivers. What it delivers is the right to work for less and with less power. A right to bargain state is significantly better for folks. There's another area where this is demonstrated, hunger today. 15.3 million children live in food insecure households. 23% of children in 38 states and Washington, D.C. live in food insecure households. African Americans, Native Americans, and Latinos are disproportionately at risk. And out of the top 10 states with the highest food insecurity rate for children, 9 of those states are right-to-work states, right? So during the 1950s and 60s, federal housing programs and services nearly eradicated homelessness. However, during the 1980s, housing programs were slashed by half and the homeless population in the U.S. began to grow ever since. So in the 1950s, we were number 1 in infrastructure, roads, bridges, rails, dams, right? We're number 9 now. Right? Think about that. So you don't have to take our word for it. It's not an argument that I'm making on political lines or labor versus corporate. The American Society of Civil Engineers, right? This is what they're charged with doing, going out and testing and checking and grading our infrastructure. What do you think our infrastructure is rated at now on an A to F scale? D minus. Who said it? Extra credit. D minus, right? D minus. There's over 2,000 bridges in Illinois alone that are deemed fracture critical. That means they're ready to fall down, right? I don't know why this is acceptable to folks. We'll get into it. And lastly, the middle class. In the 1950s, the middle class was the largest that it had ever been. Today, it's the smallest it's been in generations. In the 1950s, a family could afford to live on one income. In the 1950s, families spent an average of 22% of their income on housing. Today, that number is about 43%. Income inequality is the highest it's been. 70% of countries have more equal income distribution than the United States. The handful of Walton family heirs in this country have 42% of America's, have more wealth than 42% of America's families combined. Think about that. You're talking about a handful of people. The poorest half of the United States owns 2.5% of the country's wealth, while the top 1% own 35% of it. Tax rates for the middle class remain unchanged since 1960. The tax rates on the highest earning Americans have plunged from almost 70% in 1945 to around 35% today. All right, that's the chum in the water. So the labor leaders that are in the room, raise your hand for a second if you're involved with labor. All right? You can take pride in the fact that you're a defender of the middle class, right? The largest concentration or the largest group of folks in the middle class today are men and women from organized labor, right? Why is that? It's because we fight for what we get. We demand better wages, working conditions, safer working conditions, retirement, income security, right? That's how it works. Nobody's just going to give it away. They're going to challenge and fight for it. So unions were at their most dense and in greatest numbers back in the 1950s as a result of laws that were passed in the 30s and 40s, right? Those laws have been eroded. They've been challenged. The agencies designed to administer, the administrative agencies are designed to administer the laws that govern our work have been diminished as well. So we're the smallest that we've been since that time. We're about 13 million people right now, right, nationwide. So we're the smallest, and some would argue at our weakest right now. But if that's the case, union avoidance and union busting have become a multi-billion-dollar industry in this country, right? You got to ask yourself why and what's at stake, right? You got to dig into that a little bit more. So that's what we do as a labor movement. We want to make sure that we're taking the middle class and taking policies and elected officials and legislation and regulation and whatever else that we can to fight to expand that middle class. Our country does not work without a healthy and viable middle class, right? That's a lot to think about. It's a lot to get your brain around sometimes. For students, for adults, for retirees, because it's all the rage right now, in Springfield even. How does this impact you as students? Here's one way it impacts you as students. Your universities right now are going into their 4th month of their budget year, right? Still haven't gotten money for operations from the state. This is a big problem. Because for those of you who have been through a budget process before, there's a saying when all this stuff is done. And elected officials and politicians, you'll say, show me your budget and you'll show me your priorities, right? We should be demanding better. We should be demanding that our institutions are fully funded. We should be demanding that this is a priority in what we're doing right now as a society, right? So the mission of the labor movement is not just to fight for the folks that we represent every day in our contracts. It's also to fight for our futures and to fight for the unorganized and those we intend to organize. And that's part of what we do. It's part of the people that I represent. They chose to spend their lives doing just that, right? It makes me proud to be a part of it. But at the same time, it's a very daunting and challenging task sometimes because how do we evolve? The labor movement has to evolve as well. And that's part of what's happening now in this changing world, not just globalization, but what's happening here in our own country about where our priorities are around budgeting and so forth. Where do we as a labor movement fit in all this? How do we operate in all this, right? The labor movement in the United States, we were the first chartered Central Labor Council. What does that mean? We were the first organized body that was chartered by the national AFL-CIO to say, you represent you have the ability to represent a broad breadth of workers in different industries to coordinate all their activity, right? So Samuel Gompers, who's the founder of the modern day labor movement, gave us our first charter at the CFL. Does anybody know what Haymarket is, the Haymarket Affair? Anyone who's not a teacher? No. All right. So a few hands went up. I'll save you the trouble. But the Haymarket Affair happened in Chicago in May of 1891, I think. But it was a fight for fairness. It was a fight for justice. It was a fight for civil rights. It was a fight for the 40-hour work week. It was a fight for a lot of different things that were happening in society at the time. And what happened was, out of that struggle came May Day. May Day is celebrated around the world as International Worker Day, right? It's essentially Labor Day for the world. We don't teach it here in America. largely. Some places do, right? But then what happened right after that, or shortly after that, was the Pullman Porter strike. Anybody familiar with that? Right? So basically the Pullman Porter strike happened when Grover Cleveland was president of the United States, and it was the rail car porters at the Pullman factory, and it also went around the country on the trains. They demanded better wages and better working conditions and living conditions, and from housing to wages. And a strike ensued, essentially. And what happened was, in order to assuage the workers and to calm things, Grover Cleveland said we need to give these folks a national holiday once everything was done, but he did not want it to be May Day. So we got Labor Day in our country in September, which put some distance between May and September, but that's how we got essentially 2 Labor Days in America. But all this happened right here in Chicago, happened in Pullman, happened at Haymarket, right? Then you have the back of the yards in Chicago, the Stockyard Gates. Upton Sinclair wrote a book called The Jungle. You may have had to read it, some of you who are students, but he described Chicago as the hog butcher to the world. And it was at the time, right? We're still the nation's central rail hub. Chicago is, right? And at the time, all the animals would be brought to slaughter around the same times of year, different types of animals, and they would all be brought by rail into Chicago where the slaughterhouses were. A lot of that doesn't exist anymore. There's still a lot of food processing and manufacturing that takes place, but not general slaughter. That happens out in the prairie states with big kill houses. They'll slaughter over 24 head a day. But all this was happening at the same time in the city of Chicago, which brought a lot of immigrants there as well, and the need for organizing, the need for better working conditions, right? But the reason why I bring it up is those conditions no longer exist. That labor movement, there are elements of it, but the exact conditions that existed then aren't the same as they are now, and the laws are different as well. So as labor leaders, that requires us to change and change our game a little bit as well in the way that we approach problems. So I have 3 examples here that I've chosen to talk about by way of example on some things that we've done differently at the CFL and in the Chicago labor movement to mix things up, to change things, to look at things through a different perspective. One of them has to do with the city budget in Chicago. It's relevant because we're all going through budget problems right now, nationally, statewide. The city of Chicago, the county of Cook, we all have similar problems, but here's how we chose to attack some of these problems in the city of Chicago. Rahm Emanuel, anybody know Rahm Emanuel? Yeah, former chief of staff, head of the DNC, now mayor of the city of Chicago, tough guy. He came to Chicago, decided to run for mayor, came to see us at the CFL and was seeking an endorsement from the men and women of organized labor. And we did not give him the endorsement the first time that he ran, or the second time for that matter, but the first time in particular. And I think that shaped some of how he planned to approach us after the election. And immediately after the election, he announced that there would be about 690 layoffs in order to close a 30 million or so budget gap in the city of Chicago. And what he was looking for was work rule changes that would have been impossible to negotiate in that time frame, or the layoffs would ensue, right? So we had a meeting with him. We told him it was impossible to negotiate the work rule changes in that time frame, but we had another idea. When he was running for mayor, he had a series of priorities that he had laid out around healthcare savings, around work rule changes, around efficiencies in government. And what we started to do was attack those problems that he was going to be faced with from a perspective of workers, right? We started to get a handle on what was going on in the city from a worker perspective. And when we had this first meeting with the mayor, he said, I need to close that budget gap or the workers are going to get laid off. We told him we would come up with efficiency models in government where he could get a savings in how he runs government, run a cleaner government, and then use that savings to save the jobs, right? We'd never really done that before. But what we did was we hired a consultant from out east, I think in Pennsylvania, somebody who had done a lot of work in different Democratic campaigns at the time because he was coming from the Democratic House leadership, and we needed to get somebody who was unimpeachable, somebody who had broad experience running in some of these circles that the mayor had run in the past, and so we could establish credibility. And what we did was we sat down with the workers in the various departments of the city and we said, how does your department run? How should it run? What's missing? And what we were able to do was at first tell the mayor, we'll give you the efficiency models, you save the layoffs. He said fine, but then he announced the layoffs anyway. So we did a press conference and said he's searching for $30 million in work rule changes, or he's gonna have to lay these workers off. And what we did was said we came up with $184 million in savings. So put the workers back. And it was a pretty tough way to start your relationship with someone like the mayor, but it proved a good point to him that we would make a better friend and ally than foe. But it required us to do some really out-of-the-box, different type of thinking for labor folks. And what it's resulted in since then is about 2,800 jobs saved. We're insourcing some work now, and it really is a new model for how things should be done. We established a city labor management cooperation committee, where in the contract term, we're able to talk about issues that relate to the contract, but not act on them unless there's enough folks on both sides that agree to move forward. I'll give you an example in healthcare. After we dealt with the mayor on this issue and proved to him that we could be good allies, we had been working on some efficiency models around healthcare. In the city of Chicago right now, the city workers have gone almost 10 years now without a copay increase in their health insurance. That's unheard of. They're in the top 0.001 percentile for efficiencies in healthcare and savings in healthcare, right? We've saved hundreds of millions of dollars in this area by instituting wellness programs and things like that that were amenable to us, that were acceptable to the workers, right? And without having to negotiate them in a collective bargaining context, we were able to implement them through the work of the LMCC. This saved jobs. It kept copays lower. It's true win-win-win-win for the taxpayer as well, right? So what we've done is we've looked at other efficiencies in government. I'll give you another example. You know, the mayor was calling for work rule changes, and what we did was point it out to him very quickly. After we let them demonstrate that this was their entire budget, these are all the great ideas that they had, we then said, okay, here's what we think you missed. You know, there was an example with concrete. The city was paying $100 per cubic yard of concrete in their contract to do curb and gutter work and things like that. The amount of concrete that's bought is in the hundreds of millions of dollars, right? We found out that if the city was willing to negotiate a new contract with the supplier that would guarantee the average 3-year running average, they would be able to cut that price down to $18 per cubic yard of concrete. That's 82% savings in concrete, right? But something else was working there with the concrete stuff, and you'd only know this if you dealt with some of the workers and worker representatives that were there. It takes 5 hours to pour, set, and cure that type of concrete that they use for curb and gutter work, right? Currently, they were working the workers 5 8-hour days. But in the contract, since about the 1980s, they had the ability to work 4 10-hour days, right? That's 40 hours a week in both scenarios, right? But you get 60% more pours at straight time if you work the 4 10-hour days, right? It's a lot of money. That's a lot of savings. It's a lot of jobs saved. So what we were able to demonstrate to the mayor is we will continue to create these efficiency models. You can take them down and look like a good mayor that's running an efficient government, but we save jobs, right? That's not the game that we usually get into from a labor perspective, right? That's not what we usually do, right? But it's what we were forced to do. I give a lot of credit to the local leaders there. The grid system that's used for garbage pickup was developed by the laborers. They ran a more efficient grid system, or developed a better one than the private sector came up with. Saved their members' jobs. At that point, they were looking at an entire local union losing their membership, right? And instead saved them and turned it around. A lot of credit goes to them, but that's all new type of thinking for labor folks. The other one has to do with an infrastructure trust. And this is something that Ed Smith knows a lot about. Because a large part of the reason why we have a Chicago Infrastructure Trust is because of Ulico. The first company to step up and guarantee funding for projects under the Chicago Infrastructure Trust was Ulico. Then everybody else started to follow suit, right? So you get a lot of credit for that, Ed, in establishing the Infrastructure Trust and Ulico. It's not just a plug, this is real stuff, right? So how the Chicago Infrastructure Trust could work would be something like this. If you look at the Empire State Building in New York, right? Pretty familiar buildings, privately owned. The owner of the Empire State Building has tenants, right? And has a building that he has to run and maintain for his tenants. That owner didn't have the ability to retrofit his building and upgrade the heating, the air conditioning, the windows, the water, everything that it takes to run and maintain a building, right? The physical operations of a building. A company went in there, I believe it was Honeywell or somebody like that, went in and did an assessment on the building and said, if you did all new, modernized HVAC, cooling, heating, plumbing, all that stuff, you could save about 31 cents on the dollar on your bills, right? So a private investor went in and said, fine, I will give you the money to do the upgrade. You're going to give me this rate of return, and after you pay me back, you can keep the upgrades to your building, right? They did it. He paid the money back quicker because they got 41 cents on the dollar, not 31 cents on the dollar. Everybody won. The tenants, lower rent or maintained rent level. The building ran more efficiently. The carbon footprint was lower, so the environment wins too. It was a good success story. So what we did was we took that idea at the Chicago Infrastructure Trust. We took a small group of publicly held buildings, right, in this city, and we said we're going to retrofit these buildings. It's called Retrofit 1 is the name of the project. The second project will be Retrofit 2, and hopefully we'll blow it out with the scale because it'll be much larger scale. So that's what we were able to do. We're the first city to come out and do it around the country, but labor was leading the way in that sense. Labor had reinvented itself in that way to facilitate this type of discussion and this type of funding. It's not a new concept for us. The truth of the matter is companies like Ulico, you also have the AFL-CIO hit and bit, will take union pension fund money and invest it in real estate deals which will put our workers to work, right? Our trained tradesmen, men and women, will put them to work, right? Ed refers to it as a double bottom line effect because you're taking union pension fund money that needs to be invested prudently anyway, and you're investing, like in this case of Chicago, they need a lot of apartments, rental units, rental space. So they'll invest in buildings that create the rental space that's needed for the city, right? You're creating more units, which help keep the rent costs down. You're putting people to work in the Chicagoland area, union skilled tradesmen and women, right? And you're getting a good rate of return for your investors. That's another way that labor has invented itself. The other way is you're probably familiar with McCormick Place, Navy Pier in the city of Chicago. One of the largest income generators for the state of Illinois is McCormick Place and Navy Pier. Navy Pier is the largest tourist attraction in the Midwest, right? Those two entities, from a travel and leisure and convention and tourism perspective, create millions of dollars for the state in revenue, right? And tax revenue. Fund a lot of different things, right? They bring in folks that rent hotels. The hotel tax has a piece of it for Chicago Sports Commission, which builds Soldier Field, which builds Comiskey Park, which maintains those entities as well. It funds other aspects of state government. So what happened was the state of Illinois passed some laws which turned McCormick Place into a right-to-work state. Those laws were challenged by the carpenters and teamsters. They won the legal challenge. They won the appeal. They won the appeal on that, which then prompted us to have better negotiating power with the mayor to say, let's negotiate a settlement. We negotiated a settlement with the city, which guaranteed that work would still be done union in McCormick Place, but we did something else. The unions did something that no other city does. We do what's called a road show. We take representatives from the different crafts at McCormick Place and Navy Pier, and we go with the convention and tourism Bureau, which is now known as Choose Chicago. And we go around the country and we compete for business to bring business into Chicago on the convention and tourism side, right? Since the settlement, right? Since the settlement 5 years ago, we've booked $11.2 billion worth of new business to the city of Chicago. Nobody's doing that right now, right? And the takeaway here for all of us, and the takeaway for you should be that we're in it together, right? That we need to find ways to work together. This business of us, them, win all, lose all, it's got to stop. That's what's killing us as a state. It's what's hurting us as a city. It's what's hurting us at the county level as well, right? So from our perspective, we've got a really good group of labor leaders around the state. My jurisdictional footprint is Cook County, so I primarily deal with those folks, but they see it, they get it, they understand it. They know that we got to have this. Where are the folks here going to work? Where are you students going to work, and what's that going to look like, right? Policies and the things that are being discussed and laid out now are going to make a difference in your lives, right? So I'm glad to see you folks here. I'm glad to see you paying attention. I'm honored that you're here even listening, because it does impact you. You know, when you get to a job that has better benefits and pay, it didn't just get that way. Somebody fought to make it that way. And it's important to recognize that and understand what you're getting yourself into and what your demands should be, you know, as students and as participants in our economy. So those are my remarks. Thank you very much. I'll take questions. I hope that was okay.
That's great. That was great, Mr. Ramirez. I want to ask a couple questions to kick things off. We'll have microphones here and there. When you have a question, let's raise your hand so that everybody can hear. My first question is, these new models that you've talked about for what unions are doing today in Chicago really are different from what has traditionally been done. Do you see this as a way that nationwide the labor movement could reinvigorate itself if this sort of model were done in other places?
Yeah, look, I think we're going to have to. I mean, basically, this isn't just a survival play. It really is enhancing the lives of our folks in our communities. You know, I think one of the things that we really try to focus on in Chicago is to let folks know that the labor movement is really about strong communities. And what does that mean? It means healthy and safe retirements. It means good schools. It means good health care. It means good wages, right? And sometimes you have to step up and demand those things, you know, but we also have a responsibility where we can notice and highlight efficiencies in government to point those out and make sure that we're capitalizing on them in a way that helps us save jobs and help in other ways, keeping taxes low, for one example. You know, these are important things to do, and I think this evolution is going to continue to have to take place in order for folks to coexist and survive.
Okay, who has a question now? Raise your hand. Yes, sir.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. It was
Sure.
very interesting and informative. Working in the public sector most of my career, or at least around it all of my career, the governor's turnaround agenda is alarming for labor folks. But the thing more alarming to me is the Supreme Court this year is going to be discussing fair share. And for public sector union employees, fair share, or the loss of fair share, in my opinion, could have some serious ramifications moving forward. What are your thoughts about, and I think, you know, based on the makeup of the current Supreme Court, it looks as if fair share may very well go away. What do you think, or how deep of a cut will it be to organize labor, at least on the public sector, if fair share is abolished by the Supreme Court?
Yeah, there's a lot of I will. There's a lot of discussion about this right now in labor circles, and you know, it's like I always tell folks. You know, in the labor world, I will tell labor leaders all the time. You know, what you do at the negotiating table can be very easily disrupted or disturbed or taken away in the halls of government or in a court, right? Friedrichs is the case that you're talking about. It's in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, which will be ruled on. It has to do with fair share. The way things work right now, union members can decide to not participate in a union's political activity, but they are required to pay their fair share for everything else that unions do. Negotiating, collective bargaining, same thing. Organizing, representation, things like that, that don't have to do with the political aspect of what unions do. So they're required to pay their fair share. I always try to tell folks, it's like this. You know, for those of you that have ever belonged to a condo association or things like that, you'll know that the association is in charge of maintaining the grounds and throwing out the trash and doing the snow removal and paving the parking lot and cleaning the common areas and all that. That costs money. And what I always tell folks is, look, there's that business aspect of it. I think sometimes unions don't want to say that there's a business aspect to what we do, but there is. Right? It takes money to organize. It takes money to run the local. And what the fair share concept is that, look, you don't have to pay the portion of dues that go to political activity if that's not where you're at, right? But you do have to pay your fair share for what it takes to run the organization and do the things that it takes to get you what you have. And I'll say this, there's a difference. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can look at the difference between a unionized workforce and a non-unionized workforce. Same sector, same job. What you'll find is there's a union advantage. You'll get 30% greater wages on average, a 70% greater likelihood that you'll have employer-paid health insurance, and 80% greater likelihood that you'll have some type of employer-paid insurance, right? Not to mention professional representation. A unionized workplace is a safer workplace. The numbers bear it out. Why? Because you have trained representatives that go into a workplace and will tell you that's an unsafe job. You know, maybe those stops have been removed off of that piece of machinery, or maybe they're asking you to climb up on a scaffolding that hasn't been properly tied down. The union representatives have training in this area and therefore help to provide a safer workplace. And union workers also, at a much higher percentage, take advantage of all the other laws that are available to them in the workplace. I'll give you an example, right? President Obama, a lot of excitement around his first election, right after he got elected. One of the first things that he did as President of the United States was what? Does anybody know? The first piece of legislation that he signed into law, Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, right? What did that do, right? It gave women another avenue, right, to pursue when they were paid less for doing the same work that a man does, right? Getting paid less to do the same work just because they're a woman, right? It's not fair, right? Everybody went crazy when Obama did this. This is the first that great thing that he accomplished. But did it fix the problem? It didn't fix the problem. You know, and I think you expended all that political capital to do that when I tell them, hey, you want to know something? If you're a man, a woman, gay, straight, race, age, sex, religion, national origin, disability, whatever. If you do the work, you get the rate if you have a union contract. It doesn't matter. A union contract accomplishes that, right? So this is part of the issue that I have even with the folks on both sides of the political spectrum. As I'm like, hey, if you're not going to pass laws that actually fix things, then leave it to folks that actually will, right?
Other questions?
This is my favorite part, guys.
All right.
Yes.
Shoot.
So,
Wait, get a microphone, please.
first, thanks for being here.
Sure.
We're really thrilled that you're here. From our perspective then at this end of the state, we see the governor focusing on disabling unions as a condition to a budget. Do you see anything from your end of the state that will get him off the dime and get us towards a budget?
Yeah, I don't. Really what this is an ideological struggle. You know, it does not change how we feel about the work that we do or the work that needs to be done. What the governor is caught up on right now, and whether you're a supporter of his or not, his agenda is that he needs labor reform in order to move the budget. All right, I have a harsh analogy to that. You know, and the analogy that I use for that is he has a hostage. He's taking hostages. You know, in some cases you have groups like Mercy Home or groups like Sister Rosemary up at Misericordia Home. Folks that they do a lot of work, and some of it is state-funded work for folks that are disabled or mentally impaired, and they do a bunch of very good work there. To withhold funding for them because you have a philosophical view on labor, to me, is a problem. Right? So what I've done is not just stomp my feet about it and the governor's a bad guy. I haven't done any of that. It started about 8 months ago. I gave a speech at the City Club in Chicago, and I invited a bunch of business leaders, and I invited a bunch of folks from the social service network community in Chicago and around the state. And what I did was I told them, look, I'm going to take my labor hat off for a second, and I ask you to take your business hat off for a second, and you to take your community hat off for a second, and let's all agree that the most needy and vulnerable among us, right, should get their funding first. So back in May, a budget was passed and sent to the governor, which also gave him line item authority, veto authority with the pen. He could have crossed out everything he did not like, right, and established his priorities and passed the budget. It was passed in both houses, sent to him, and he vetoed it without even exercising the line item authority. That was a big indication for me that he was going to dig in on his philosophical issues, meaning labor reform. But the labor reform stuff has zero budget impact for him. You know, and as big of a problem as he says it is in the state, the fact of the matter is there are fewer government workers in the state of Illinois per cap than any other state in the country. You said that at a speech once, Sheila, and I picked up on that. And you know, I've been repeating it ever since, but it's true. And it's one of those things where it's just like, hey, again, I've said it before in these remarks even, if you want to see somebody's priorities, take a look at what their budget, you know, is. And what I'm trying to get folks to do, we did a press conference yesterday even with the head of United Way in Chicago, metropolitan Chicago. Her name is Wendy DeBoe, the president of AT&T, Paul LaSchiazza, and myself. And basically the message was just that. You can get the business guy, the labor guy, and the community service person to say, hey, time out. You have over 50% of the social service agencies out here that are either borrowing money to stay afloat on money that they know is coming their way anyway, right? But it's not being transmitted. But the state has the money. They're not appropriating the money. This is an appropriation problem. It's not a raise funds and then distribute problem, or raise taxes and distribute problem. It's an appropriation, right? So what we're trying to do is tell them, release the money, get the people the help that they need, because the problem is some of these agencies that provide child care to single mothers are no longer providing the child care to those single mothers. So what does a single mother do? She has to lose the job. When she loses the job, then she needs more social services, right? That's crazy stuff that we're talking about here. But we are full on stuck on crazy right now here in Illinois. You know, and like I've said before, this is going to start having a real toll. One of your sister universities, Eastern Illinois, is contemplating whether or not they can even keep their doors open next year. That's crazy. That's crazy. And we have the money. The other thing that I'll say, the other example of that is this. You have Choose Chicago, the convention and tourism arm now for the entire state, right? $11.2 billion worth of new business. Has opened offices in Mexico and Beijing and 3 other different cities in China, right? Promoting tourism and travel to the city of Chicago and in the region, right? Tremendously successful, right? We don't have to raise taxes or build new stuff or whatever. We're just using the existing facilities we have, doing more to attract them, right? Very successful. The irony of it all is they're not being funded right now, even though the money is in the state coffers to do it. Their funding comes from the hotel tax, right? So the money's been raised already. The taxes have been paid already. They're sitting in the state coffers, and all the state has to do is transmit the money. Here's the real issue. Choose Chicago does a winter campaign throughout the Midwest region, which generates 6,000 to 9,000 jobs in the Chicagoland region. 6,000 to 9,000 jobs. If they don't get their funding in the next 3 or 4 weeks, they're not going to be able to do their winter campaign. 6,000 to 9,000 jobs. What does that do to United Way and the other social service providers? It puts another 6,000 to 9,000 people in need, right? It's absolutely mind-boggling what's taking place right now.
Steve?
Yeah, in your bio, one of the things that was mentioned is that you're a board member on Chicago Federal Reserve Bank.
Yes.
Could you explain what, as a labor leader, you do on the Chicago Fed's board?
A lot.
Possibly influence?
Yeah, a lot.
Could you kind of elaborate on that?
Yeah, of course.
We hear a lot about the dynamic going on between raise interest rates,
Right.
keep interest rates where they are now,
Mhm.
increase employment. There's a very heated debate going on in the country right now, and you alluded to some of the implications of that
Yeah.
with respect to income levels and so forth.
That is a great question. And I hope I have a great answer. But it is a great question. So what is a labor guy doing on the Federal Reserve Bank, right? I am the, whatever, stink bomb in church, turd in the punch bowl, whatever you want to call it, right? But it's great. I mean, that's not the approach I take, but, at the meetings. But, on that board are also the president and CEO of ComEd, of Manpower, Jeff Juris, of Motorola, Inc. And then you have all the other directors that are a different class director, but they're all bank folks as well. So the Federal Reserve Bank here in America, we're one of the only nations left that have what's called a dual mandate for full employment and low prices or interest rates, right? So what we strive to do is have maximum employment, right? And the other thing is when you raise interest rates, what we're able to do is come up with a recommendation, because each Federal Reserve Bank is technically its own, it's not a branch, it's its own entity. Right, and then they have what's called the FOMC, the Fair Open Markets Committee meeting, which is where Chairwoman Yellen decides, not on her own, but with the rest of the board, what we're going to do with interest rates. Right, interest rates haven't gone up. There's thought that they might go up sometime soon. I could share some things with you, but I would get in big trouble if I did in that respect. But I will tell you this, at some point they're going to go up. The two issues that are being discussed right now in the economic circles are the lift and then the run, is what they call it. So the lifting of the interest rates and then the run. What increments are you going to go up, right? So what we're arguing, what we're able to argue at this level is to say, look, if you raise interest rates now, you will have a bad effect, right, a negative effect on real wages, right? So when I'm at the meetings, I'm saying absolutely not. We should not be voting to raise interest rates right now. And it's funny because you're able to throw perspectives out there with these business leaders that they haven't seen before, maybe, or they haven't taken into consideration. Because if you look at it, I always laugh because I'm like, you guys have the most myopic view of life that I've ever seen, the most one-sided view of life that I've ever seen. Because she's on your board, you're on her board, and all you guys do is talk to each other. You know what I mean? You talk to each other from a business perspective. Where is the varying perspectives on the board? But I gotta even publicly give a lot of credit to the chair of the Federal Reserve Bank in Chicago named Charlie Evans, right? And because he seeks these different points of views, and he is the person now at the national level that leads the way on this. As an economist, it's a big deal to have rules named after you, economic rules and principles named after you, right? And so he's the Evans rule, right? Which basically, he's not going to like the way I've oversimplified this, but what happened was under Chairman Bernanke, there was a lot of economists that would be like, on this day, we need to raise interest rates, right? And then they'd get to that day and they'd be like, well, maybe it's later at another day, right? And he'd set the date certain, right? And all Charlie Evans did basically was said, hey, when conditions meet X and Y, then we should consider raising interest rates, which is a much more pragmatic view. Everybody's like, oh, yeah, the Evans rule, that's great, let's do that. But from a labor perspective, we have a lot to say about, and they like to listen a lot about what we have to say in terms of wages, in terms of real wages. See, what they'll say is like, hey, employment's up, we're meeting our goal. And I'll be like, time out. Employment might be up, but average hourly week work is down because people are trying to escape that responsibility from the Affordable Care Act, right? And then you'll have somebody like Jeff Juris from Manpower say, holy shit, he's right. This is a quote from him, that's not me, right? He'd be like, he's right, and so you'll start to get folks, you get that discussion going. But I give a lot of credit to Charlie Evans for seeking out those other voices. He's viewed as a very pragmatic front-runner type guy, and I couldn't be on a better Federal Reserve Bank board. I will say that I'm not the only one that is. There are other folks that we've even helped get on other boards around the country to seek that view. The board seeks to have different varying perspectives from the economy. It's up to labor to make sure that we announce ourselves and let them know that we have an opinion on all these matters, around interest rates. But there's a real danger to all of that. And I'll give you this one example along those lines. When you said that, the first thing that popped into my mind is there was this piece of legislation when the economic downturn happened. Rand Paul came out with this audit the Fed. You remember that? Audit the Fed, right? It was would have been the most catastrophic piece of legislation that ever passed, because what it did was it tried to place blame on the Fed, which all their quantitative easing, everything's worked. It's been one of the greatest return on investments that we've ever had, right? So it's worked, right? But what Rand Paul was saying was, when do you have this bill called Audit the Fed? And it sounds great because everybody's so pissed off about the economy. They're like, yeah, audit the Fed. The Fed is one of the most audited institutions in America, right? In the world, right? So the last thing you want to do is audit them more, right? So, but really what it called for was, in the bill, was anything but what he was saying. It shouldn't come as a shock for folks to know that when this legislation has a name or a title or anything, do not. It's like the label on a hot dog. It's it's not meat. Look at everything else. You got to look at the ingredients, right? And so this audit the Fed bill basically would have gotten rid of the dual mandate, right? What Rand Paul was seeking to do was get rid of the jobs, full employment mandate, so that then they wouldn't have to be responsible for that, or the employer community wouldn't have to be responsible for that. So who is he representing there? Why is that beneficial? It's not. We need to have that in there. It needs to maintain it. That's one of my responsibilities, is to make sure we keep that. The other thing is he wanted to make it so the Federal Reserve would have to go to Congress before they could raise or lower interest rates. Imagine that. You can't get them to do a damn budget, right? They kick the can down the road with the budget here, and it's going to ruin our holidays because the federal budget's still not set. Now they want the Federal Reserve Bank, who have experts in this area that have now a proven track record of making the right decisions on raising and lowering of interest rates. Now he says you got to come in front of a congressional committee before you, and because those guys are experts? Come on. Let's be honest. It's not. It would have been horrible. Yeah.
Hey, Dave, just a comment. You've got the statement that Jorge made about we got a D- in our infrastructure, and you've never had a time in our country when you had zero interest rates. There was never a time we could have been rebuilding cheaper our infrastructure in America. It's
right.
Our dysfunctional Congress. They recently sold oil out of the strategic reserve, oil prices are low, to fund the highway bill, which is just crazy. And you could have rebuilt America's infrastructure with zero interest rate, or 0.5% or 1%. Never in our time. We've missed an opportunity. We're going to miss an opportunity to rebuild and make America great again, to quote somebody else.
Yeah.
We could have rebuilt our infrastructure.
Well, I always think about, and that's a great point because it's always on our mind, infrastructure is how we're going to grow. Infrastructure and manufacturing. Those are the two ways we're going to grow our way out of this, right? There's a lot of manufacturing that's gone. South America, it's gone to Asia. A lot of it, the stuff that's here though, is here, and we should fight to keep it here. It's high-skilled manufacturing. Right? These are jobs that pay $50,000 to $80,000 a year and more if you're willing to work harder, right? These are good jobs. These are good businesses you can run and own and understand. And the reason why we got to keep that level of manufacturing here is because innovation follows manufacturing. The next great idea comes from somebody that's messing around with something in a shop, right? It's how it's always happened in our history, right? So innovation and manufacturing of that nature go hand in hand, right? So we got to keep all that stuff together. We got to fight to keep that together because other places want to take it. You have the governor from the state of Alabama who's on TV saying, we're going to teach all of our kids about manufacturing. We're going to gear our schools and our education towards manufacturing because he knows 5 to 7 multiplier. They come from Alabama to Illinois and they court companies and say, move to Alabama. No taxes, stipends for new equipment, educated workforce, all the things you could want, right? Just come to Alabama, right? But getting back to infrastructure, I always think of Winston Churchill, right? He said, you can always count on America to do the right thing after they've tried everything else, right? So that's when I think of infrastructure, I think of him because I think, hey, we're going to have to rebuild all these roads, bridges, and rail whether we like it or not because they're going to fall apart. They're going to fall down. And then we're going to be forced to build them. And then when we're forced to build them, we'll do the job creation, the economy will come back. But It's been years since we've authorized a new roads bill. It's been years. The last capital bill that was done, here in Illinois, and Sheila, you know about this, was $31 billion. It was, during your tenure, right? When all those ribbons were cut and everything was done, those capital bills are done. The last letting on that capital bill happened 6 months before you finished your term, I think. So we haven't had a capital bill in Illinois since then. Why not? You know what capital bills do? They build new buildings on campuses like this, right? That puts people to work. It gives you better educational opportunities. It stimulates so much more. But that's what we got to do. We're going to be forced to do that capital once everything's fallen down and we have no other choice. Right? So you can count on America to do the right thing after they've tried everything else.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. It was great.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ramirez, for making the trek down here from Chicago. We appreciate you making the effort to do that on behalf of the Paul Simon Institute.
Thank you.
And
That was fun.
Hispanic Latino Heritage Month. I want to thank you as well for being here. And Ed Smith, I want to thank you and Ulico for your support for this lecture series and for this institute. Thank you all for being here. We're adjourned.